Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Eric. Gonna do a movie review today. Um, Going pretty slow through the sci-fi of the 1990s, but it's been a while. But today I'm going to talk about Star Trek: First Contact from 1996. Have the DVD set here of I guess all the Next Generation movies are in this set. So First Contact is, I think, generally considered the best of the Next Generation movies, and I'm inclined to agree. I like Generations more. If I had to choose, I might watch Generations instead. But First Contact is probably the most cohesive of all the Next Generation films. I mean, it was the first one, I suppose, to include to be just focused on the crew from the Next Generation. Of course, the previous film you had the Captain Kirk storyline and kind of a crossover type of story going. So this was the first time. Now, Next Generation, their trajectory in the movies is a lot different from the original crew because I believe the TV show, it ran for 7 seasons. It goes off the air, I think, I want to say 94, spring of 94. And then the first movie comes out just a few months later. So they're in that odd place of moving right from being a television series to suddenly becoming a film franchise. So that's a little bit rare. I mean, I'm sure there's other examples of that, but a bit of an oddity maybe, and at least in science fiction movie history. And I think that might account for some of, I don't know, maybe some of the why these movies never quite hit the level of the show, or never quite had the same resonance as the films with the original crew. Of course, the original Star Trek run of films, there was about a decade break, a little bit more, between the TV show and the movies. So everyone had aged a decade, and I think that gave a little bit more, I don't know, flexibility maybe to the original movies, and also too, I think, Next Generation, where it was more of an ensemble type of show. I mean, the original, it was really Kirk and Spock, and McCoy as a third, and the other characters were critical, of course, but it was really that core three that we follow through the movies. Whereas Next Generation, every member of the cast would get storylines each season, and there would be just a general, more of a communal approach to Star Trek Generation. And I know sometimes that's a criticism of that show because there was a sense of everybody gets along, they're all awesome at conflict resolution. So there was a sense like it's almost like this utopian vision of Star Trek where problem solvers always win the day. So, and that's not a bad thing at all. I'm not knocking that, but I think moving that type of approach into the movies, I think it's some. I don't know if they ever quite got that right. Maybe I'm wrong about that. And I think I might point out some things of First Contact that I don't know, might support my point there a little bit. But just a little bit about the story of this one. So this is a Borg storyline. Of course, the Borg were the big antagonist of Next Generation. This cyborg creatures who go around assimilating people. They're half machine, mostly machine, but there's some organic, and they're like a hive mind, and they go around, the famous line, resistance is futile, things like that. And they seem to really really have a problem with Earth because they keep trying to take over Earth. Of course, the Best of Both Worlds from the TV series was very famous ones where Picard himself was assimilated, and that was it. But the Borg would recur throughout the TV show. And of course, that plays into the movie First Contact, where in the opening scene, Picard, who apparently still has PTSD from his experience, is still having nightmares of being on the Borg ship and losing his identity and all that. Of course, there had been an episode, a really good episode of Next Generation about Picard's PTSD with his experience with the Borg. So that's how this film starts out. Then we learn that yet again the Borg are attacking Earth. The Enterprise is told not to interfere probably because Picard, he's got a connection with the Borg. So anyway, they stay back, and Picard defies orders and starts to get into the fight. And suddenly the story moves into time travel, where the Borg have managed to travel back into time and prevent humanity from achieving light speed. Okay, so they can assimilate the entire planet. So the Enterprise has to go back in time and stop the Borg from disrupting the human timeline. So, we're kind of back to time travel and fixing timelines, which we've a recurring theme, definitely in the Star Trek movies, go to time travel a lot in the movies. So they're back in 21st century Earth, and of course, famously in Star Trek, there was a catastrophic war, Third World War, at some point in the 21st century, and they've arrived at a point after this war has occurred, and humanity, I suppose, is dispersed into various, communities, kind of I don't know. We never get a full picture of whatever is happening on Earth. I guess we're in Montana, but this is where the famous Zefram Cochrane, who I believe his mythology goes back to the original series, was the human who built the first warp engine. So Picard's crew, they have to make sure Cochrane, achieves light speed. Meanwhile, some Borg manage to beam aboard the Enterprise, so you have this struggle aboard the ship, which is a new ship, by the way, because in Generations, Enterprise D, I believe, was destroyed. So, but it's not a big deal in this movie, but it's a new ship, and they have to fight off the Borg. So you have different storylines going on. You have Data, Brent Spiner back as Data, who is captured by the Borg, and he is kind of like these odd scenes with the Borg Queen, which is a new character introduced, where she sort of tempts Data to becoming a flesh and blood type of being. So I guess people like those scenes, but I don't know. They never really worked for me. I don't know. So yeah, but that's me. So yeah, and then we have the Zefram Cochrane character in here, who's played by James Cromwell, I believe, and he's kind of played him as this kind of he listens to like rockabilly music, and he drinks, and he's kind of portrayed as this kind of a goofball who is this high figure from history, who everyone admires. So that's kind of a running joke in the film, which once again I felt wore a little thin with me. I thought it would have been a little more interesting to make him, we are in a point where after Earth has been through something catastrophic, to make him like kind of a darker, haunted type of character, but I guess they decided to go in the more comedic direction, and Alfre Woodard is in here as I believe, I don't know if she's with Cochrane as a couple or their friends. It's a little bit not really explained, but she establishes a rapport with Picard as we go through the film. So that's the story of First Contact, and of course the title itself refers to what happens to the end, which I'll get into some spoilers there. But yeah, I mentioned I like the Cochrane character. It's fine. Cromwell is is fine in the role, but maybe played the goofiness of the character a bit too far for me. Like when they're, which is a cool scene when they're going to do the initial launch to test the warp core. He puts on Steppenwolf, Magic Carpet Ride, which I don't know how that plays today, but I don't know. I guess that's meant to be a big laugh when that happens, but I don't know. It kind of lands a little bit flat today. And I guess really this movie, Picard, though, is the main arc in this movie where Patrick Stewart is really, there's a lot of scenes where he's getting angry and he's getting yelled at. You know, there's a big argument he has with Worf at one point where they have a disagreement, and so at one point he starts smashing things in his ready room or office or whatever. So he's full of anger towards the Borg, and the film explicitly lays out the connections with Captain Ahab and Moby Dick. So yeah, once again, like I think of Picard from the TV show, who was usually like the level-headed leader, and I guess it was a challenge to make him kind of angry and dealing with all these emotions in the film. But once again, it just maybe felt like a lot at times with him getting over his anger. And once again, I feel like the TV show had dealt with that quite a bit anyway. So in some ways, this movie just felt a little bit. Clearly, it was for the fans. Like, I guess if you asked making a generalization here, but if you asked a lot of Star Trek fans in the mid-90s, what do you hope the next movie's about? Of course, many would say, well, the Borg. We want a big movie where the Borg are the bad guy, are the antagonists. And, and this was the movie they got. And, I mean, it's fine. It just felt a little bit recycled to me. They did bring in the time travel wrinkle, which was worked, and it was cool to go back to this time in 21st century Earth that Star Trek is alluded to a lot in its mythology, but we were never actually there when it happened. And it is a cool ending. Spoiler, when the Vulcans land and establish first contact with the humans, the surviving humans from the war. I mean, that's yeah, like I said, I think that it is a cool ending. It's definitely very. I hate the term fan service. It's way overused. But once again, there's a lot of this in this movie where it really did felt like the writers were. This is a movie where we're not going to really challenge the fans that much. We're going to really let's give them what they want. Let's put in. There's a lot of cameos from characters, from minor characters from Star Trek Generation. I think Dwight Schultz is Barclay, who was a kind of a side character from the Next Generation, has a moment, and some characters from Voyager appear. So yeah. So there's a lot of that in the film where let's make this one a real crowd pleaser, and one can sense that's what you're going for. I also find the action scenes in this to be a little not quite there for me. There is a big sequence where they had to go outside the Enterprise, and they are trying to stop the Borg from doing something, and they're trying to make it look like it's zero gravity, and they're shooting at each other, and I don't know, that scene just seems to go on and on forever for me. Once again, we're kind of the special, like I said, the special effects are. It's been a while, so there's that. So the action just felt a little bit stodgy for me. There's a lot of running around the ship. There's a lot of hiding out. There's a lot of just. I don't know. The action in this one just felt a little bit clunky at times, and. Yeah. So it sounds like I'm really kind of ragging on this movie a lot, but I do. I think it's a good script. I do think it's a very structured film. It's maybe kind of predictable where it's going. I guess I just wish there were some more surprises. I wish the audiences would be challenged a bit more. I do feel like all the Borg stuff had been played a little bit, so that's me. I do like the idea of the Borg being like the dark reflection of the Federation. Where the Federation, in some ways, is doing a similar thing the Borg is doing. They're going around exploring the universe and trying to get people to join the Federation, and sometimes those might be noble purposes, or maybe there's some self interest involved in that idea. And I wish the movie had maybe dealt with that a little bit more, getting into some of the more contradictions of the Federation. I know later movies and TV would get more into that, but to me that would have this movie just made it so where the Federation are the good guys and the Borg are bad. So I wish there had been a little bit more, I don't know, ambiguity there in that regard. So I should say this was directed by Jonathan Frakes, who, of course, plays Riker and was part of the cast. And, I criticize the action scenes a little bit. I think the character stuff is fine. I think there's some humor in it. There's a lot of nice moments in the film. The Jerry Goldsmith score is good. He was I like that. There's a nice main theme to the film. So yeah, First Contact. I guess just talking it out, maybe I'm not as high on that one as other fans of the series are. I know the next two are a big drop off, but I am curious to go back and revisit those, and maybe there's something there. Maybe there is something that haven't picked up on yet. So yeah, those are my thoughts on First Contact. If you watch this, let me know what you thought of the film. Did do you think this is the best of the Next Generation series? What are some things about it you liked? Or, I'd be curious to hear some of those. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Have a good day. Bye.